Hello, everyone. Today we are going to step far away from corporate greed, toxic bosses, and the relentless stress of the modern workplace. Today we are going to dive into a story about the absolute limits of human resilience, the hidden beauty of silence, and what happens when your entire world goes permanently dark, but your hands simply refuse to stop building. For 30 years, I was a master horologist, a creator of ultra-complex, bespoke mechanical watches. To truly understand my world, you have to imagine an absolute obsession with the microscopic. My daily life was spent hunched over a wooden workbench, looking through a jeweler's loupe, holding my breath to assemble gears that were no larger than a grain of sand. I spent decades threading microscopic springs with titanium tweezers, working with tolerances so tight that a single speck of dust could stop the entire machine. A single mechanical watch of my design contained over 600 individual parts, all working in perfect mathematical harmony. My eyes were my most valuable tools, my livelihood, and my sole connection to the world of the living. But 3 years ago, the shadows began to creep in. A rare, aggressive degenerative nerve condition started stealing my vision. At first, it was just a blurry gray fog around the edges of my sight. Then, the microscopic screws on my desk became impossible to focus on. Within 8 agonizing months, my world was reduced to shapes, then to vague shadows, and finally, to an impenetrable permanent black curtain. I was completely blind at the age of 52. The doctors told me there was no cure. My workshop, once a place of brilliant light, whirring lathes, and absolute precision, became a tomb. I locked the heavy wooden door, covered my workbenches with heavy canvas sheets, and surrendered to the darkness. I truly believed my life was over. The first year of blindness was a bottomless abyss of depression. When you lose the one specific sense that defines your entire identity, you feel like a ghost haunting the hallways of your own house. I spent my days sitting in an armchair, listening to the absolute silence of my home, feeling utterly useless. The world moved on, but I was trapped in a static, sightless void. But one rainy afternoon, my daughter came to visit. She brought down from the attic an old, broken grandfather clock that had belonged to my grandfather. She just wanted the wooden mahogany case as a living room decoration, but she left the heavy, grease-covered brass mechanical movement sitting on my coffee table. As I sat there in the dark, my fingers absent-mindedly brushed against the cold brass gears. Without thinking, I traced the teeth of the main wheel. My fingertips, now entirely stripped of visual input, felt hypersensitive. I could feel the microscopic layer of dust on the metal, the slight wear and tear on the escape wheel, the exact tension of the coiled mainspring. I asked my daughter to hand me a flathead screwdriver. Working entirely by touch, guided only by 30 years of ingrained muscle memory, I dismantled the clock mechanism, cleaned it blindly with a microfiber cloth, and reassembled it piece by piece. When I pushed the heavy pendulum and heard the deep, rhythmic tick-tock fill the living room, a spark ignited in the deepest, darkest part of my soul. I realized something profound. A watch isn't just something you see. It is something you feel. It is a mechanical heartbeat. I made a crazy, impossible decision right there in the dark. I was going to return to my workshop. I was going to build one last watch from scratch, the most complex caliber I had ever designed, completely blind. The reality of returning to the workshop was a living nightmare. What used to take me 10 seconds with a magnifying glass now took me 3 agonizing hours. I had to completely reorganize my entire workspace using a tactile grid system. I spent weeks carving deep notches into the wood of my desk with a chisel, so I knew exactly, to the millimeter, where every single tool, tweezer, and microscopic screw was placed. The first month was an exercise in pure, unadulterated agony. The parts one used for my wristwatches were measured in fractions of a millimeter. One afternoon, I was trying to place the balance wheel, the delicate, beating heart of the watch mechanism. My hand trembled just a fraction of an inch. My tweezers slipped. I heard the tiny, high-pitched ping of the microscopic golden while hitting the desk and bouncing off into the void of the floor. In pitch darkness, finding a 1 millimeter gear on a grooved wooden floor is mathematically impossible. I dropped to my knees, sweeping my bare hands frantically across the cold wood, crying out of pure frustration, grief, and rage. I hit the floor with my fists until my knuckles bled. I wanted to smash the desk to splinters. I felt the overwhelming, suffocating weight of my disability crushing my chest. I sat on the floor for hours, exhausted, ready to admit defeat, sell the machinery, and throw away the keys to the workshop forever. But the next morning, I didn't quit. I adapted. I realized I couldn't build a watch like a sighted man. I had to build it like a blind man. I threw away my useless magnifying glasses and bought high-fidelity contact microphones, the highly sensitive kind used by scientists to record the footsteps of insects. I attached these microphones directly to the metal of my workbench and wore heavy, noise-canceling studio headphones over my ears. Suddenly, my workshop transformed. I wasn't in the dark anymore. I was immersed in a vast, thundering ocean of sound. I could literally hear the texture of the metal. When I filed a microscopic brass gear, the headphones amplified the scraping sound so clearly that I could tell by the exact pitch of the metal when the tooth was perfectly sharp. I started assembling the movement not by looking at it, but by listening to it and feeling its microscopic vibrations through the pads of my fingers. I spent 14 grueling months assembling the Eternity caliber, 340 individual pieces. I learned to balance the microscopic hairsprings by feeling their resonant frequency humming through the tweezers. When a gear was out of place by 1/100th of a millimeter, it didn't look wrong to me. It sounded wrong, like a grand piano with a horribly out-of-tune key. I worked in absolute pitch darkness, guided by a magnificent symphony of clicks, snaps, and metallic friction. The day I placed the final bridge over the tourbillon escapement, my hands were covered in tiny, invisible scars from needle-sharp tools. I secured the last microscopic screw into the main plate. I took a deep, trembling breath, my heart pounding against my ribs, and I slowly turned the winding crown with my thumb and index finger. Through my headphones, I didn't just hear a watch tick. I heard absolute, frictionless perfection. Because I had assembled it relying purely on vibration and acoustics, the gears meshed with a liquid smoothness that my eyes would have never allowed me to achieve. It was the tightest, most perfect mechanism I had ever created in my entire life. 6 months later, my daughter guided me by the arm onto the brightly lit stage of the Geneva Watchmaking Grand Prix, the most prestigious horology event in the entire world. I presented my watch. The judges, analyzing the mechanism through their electron microscopes, were completely stunned. Not just because a blind man had managed to build a grand complication watch, but because the internal finishing of the metal and the acoustic resonance were flawlessly perfect. I won the top prize that night. I didn't see the standing ovation, but I felt the intense vibration of 1,000 people clapping in the auditorium floor beneath my feet. Today, I teach visually impaired young people how to work with micromechanics. And I want to leave you with this. Sometimes life turns off the lights on you, forcing you into an absolute, terrifying darkness. But the dark is only an empty canvas. If you have the patience to listen and the courage to use your hands, you can build a whole new universe from scratch. Sit Augusta Dale alike y suscernit paramos.